Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fair Housing and Assistance Animals Office Hours. My name is Elizabeth Anderson, and I'm the manager of operations and administration at My Dog is My Home. I started with the organization back in 2018 as a volunteer and have been part of the staff since 2023. And this is the very first conference I've been able to participate in, so I'm extremely excited to be here today as a moderator of the session. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge my support team for today on the back end, Jackson Miller and Natalie Retto. Thank you so much for keeping the session running smoothly. This is an interactive Q&A session with representatives from Housing Equity and Advocacy Resource Team, HEART LA, which is a specialized nonprofit advocating for tenants with pets and assistance animals in Los Angeles. This is an opportunity to ask questions, to learn about tenants' rights under the Fair Housing Act, how to request a reasonable accommodation, and housing providers' obligations to accommodate assistance animals. I am particularly excited about this session as I personally interact with individuals on a regular basis who are looking for support across the country. As a non-direct service organization, these requests can be really daunting as I search for resources in their area and try to guide them on how to best access services and stay with their furry family members. So I am personally looking forward to picking our experts' brains today. Speaking of our experts, we are joined today by Zaira Bernal and Diana Cruz. Zaira is the co-director and a paralegal for Heart LA. She joined the team in 2023, driven by her lifelong commitment to ensuring her community has access to legal resources in their native language and through a culturally sensitive lens. In her role, she has contributed to keeping individuals and their pets housed while also expanding her impact through grant writing, public speaking, and community engagement initiatives both within and beyond the organization. Diana is the program director for Heart LA and came to the organization as a client in 2018 and officially joined the team in 2020. Having experienced two wrongful evictions in her Los Angeles hometown, Koreatown, she's committed to helping ensure that people can access and maintain their housing. Before she joined Heart LA, she worked in a variety of community engagement roles and holds a BS in Sustainable Environmental Design with a focus on participatory urbanism from UC Davis. Today, she lives with a grumpy Siamese cat named Icarus and an energetic German Shepherd American Pit Bull mixed terrier called Rager. We are so excited to have them both here with us today in this Q&A session, and we invite you to begin putting your questions in the Whova Q&A box or to come off mute if you'd like. Zaira, Diana, I just wanted to officially thank you and welcome you to the session today. We appreciate you both being here.
Yay, thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm super excited to be here and provide any support we can for your questions.
Amazing. So, folks, please feel free to jump out off mute if you have any questions about reasonable accommodation, assistance animals. Put them in the chat if you'd like. Our experts are here to answer your questions. While we wait for folks to send in their questions, I think a great starting point might be on talking through the differences between pets and assistance animals and how Heart LA advocates for tenants of both, if either of you would be able to speak to that.
Yeah, I think I might pass this off to Zaira. Zaira is the first point of entry for our clients.
Yes, this is a common question that we get when I'm speaking to people who are a little bit interested in knowing more about what assistance animals are versus just having a pet. Although both are very impactful in a person's life, an assistance animal includes service animals and support animals. So it's kind of like an umbrella term for two different distinctive types of animals that provide services beyond just being a pet. Animals that provide specific benefits to individuals with disabilities, either through having trained tasks, which would be service animals, or emotional support animals. Both of these type of animals are covered under federal housing laws specifically, and we talk about this over and over again, the Fair Housing Act. And yeah, landlords have to provide reasonable accommodation if you do have an assistance animal, meaning that they can't impose things like pet fees or deposits, breed restrictions, or deny housing to an individual because of their animal, as long as the person who needs an assistance animal is able to provide documentation. So that's just a general overview of what that difference is. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything else I missed there, Diana, or anything you'd like to add on to that.
I think you can add on. I saw a question come in. That question is there specific paperwork that I need to look into for my clients to help advocate for their fur family members? That's a great question, one we also definitely get often. And what we start off by asking is, do you have a medical provider? We ask that question because the law says you need a reliable third party. More often than not, a medical provider, so a doctor, whether that be your primary care physician, a counselor, a therapist, they're often viewed as a reliable third party. So if they have a medical provider, to ask their medical provider to write them that letter. And then if they don't, we can get creative here, right? Okay, well, that person doesn't have to be a licensed professional in that way. Maybe they're a school counselor, maybe they're a social worker, a caseworker, right? Somebody that is aware that you have a disability and can say, like, hey, I see that you have a disability. Or I know that you have a disability, and I can see how your furry family member provides alleviates a symptom of that disability, right? And that's all that person needs to know. So again, first question we ask is, do you have a medical provider? If not, then we can explore other support systems they have. One thing we're really leaning on right now too is if people receive any type of disability benefits from the government, say they receive disability benefits, then that's the government already saying that this person has a disability. That person can then self-certify. So they don't have to get any additional paperwork. That paperwork has already been given. So that's it's coming a little more difficult now because some providers are outright not willing to write those letters anymore for fear of litigation. What we say is, hey, if somebody wants to be litigious, they're going to be litigious. Like anybody can sue anyone for anything. Whether or not they're going to win is a different thing. Because that when you're writing those letters, at no point are you saying, hey, I'm vouching that this animal is, A, B, and C. All you're saying is, I know this person has a disability, and I know that this animal helps alleviate a symptom of that disability. So it's very, yeah, A, B, and C. It's the few steps that we go through when we're approaching documentation.
They're asking about the California has state regulations in place about how and who can certify an ESA. Would the two of you be able to speak to that?
Yeah, excellent question. We touched on it a little earlier, but we always stress to people, especially clients, is that there is a difference, right? And the difference is that a service animal is trained to perform a task to help alleviate a symptom of your disability, where an emotional support animal does not need any training. They just exist to love you and provide that support. And emotional support animals, rather, are not able to go with you everywhere, like service animals are, right? So if that's like to a restaurant, grocery store, all those things, emotional support animals are primarily only protected in a housing area, right? So that's the main distinction. And the question regarding California having regulations in place, what we say is that, so this is a federal protection, right? This is across all states, is fair housing and the Disability Rights Act. And all that the law says is that the person needs to be a reliable third party. California did try to, well, there is this law in California that exists that for people that are therapists, maybe, they need to have a relationship with a client for 30 days and need to have, I think, at least two sessions with a person before they're able to provide that letter. And what we've been saying is like, well, one, that's a huge obstacle for some people. Some people don't have providers. And so that's one obstacle there. The other obstacle is, well, like that can cost money too. And you're trying to have two sessions. That'll cost money. And then lastly, it's 30 days. Like if a person has a 3-day notice to cure or quit, that's going to be really difficult for the tenant. So what we do in that situation is, well, like, hey, look, the federal law is going to trump the local law. So while California has this law in place for therapists, all of the legal advisors are kind of like, well, it exists, but nobody's really practicing it because it does violate a lot of protections that people with disabilities have. So that's just our approach to it. What we tend to say is, look, as long as you have that documentation from somebody that knows you very well, that is a reliable third party, that is all you need. Like you've met your responsibility, you've met that duty.
I saw a great question come through that I feel like our audience would love to know a little bit more about. Would you be able to talk about how best to advocate for clients to landlords who give pushback regarding ESA animals, or how to open conversations with landlords about restrictive pet policies?
Yes. So that's something that I think that I work a lot with when we're working with tenants or even just individuals in interim housing spaces that are getting pushbacks from their housing providers on having ESAs or service animals on premises. I always think that education is a really important piece to this. A lot of landlords just don't understand what their obligations are under the Fair Housing Act. And this is not something that's up for negotiation or something that they can, like, well, I do like pieces of this part of the law, but not pieces of the other. It is pretty clear about what the protections are for people who have assistance animals. They're a legally protected accommodation. And so I try to lead that conversation firmly, but, still polite. So very much clarifying what a landlord can ask for and what they can, not charging pet fees, enforcing any sort of breed restrictions, denying them our right, those are things that they cannot do when we're talking about ESAs. And then if a landlord is hesitant, it's always good to address concerns directly. So being very straightforward in communication. If there's any issues with property damage, it's always good to review with them like, well, is this based on a bias that exists, or is this a behavior that the supportive animal that's present is actually exhibiting? And then if there's just pushback that's continuous, we usually try to escalate it to organizations outside ourselves. So we're based in LA County. That means reaching out to the housing department, reaching out to the civil rights department, because we are talking about a person with disabilities, and just making sure that we're always professional, we're always to the point about what the situation is and what their obligations are, I think has been helpful in making sure that we're advocates for people who have supportive animals.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that is that very generally, I mean, when we see tenants with pets tend to make some of the best tenants because we know exactly how hard it is to find pet inclusive housing. We know it's difficult moving with pets, right? There's so many fees associated with it. So what we have observed in our work is that tenants with pets tend to make really great tenants, right? They tend to be really mindful of their pet's behavior, of picking up after them, making sure they're leashing communal areas. So that's I think when approaching landlords too, it's like, well, have you considered this part of like a person that has a pet and is a tenant? They tend to stay really long and be really great tenants because it's really difficult finding pet inclusive housing.
Someone is asking about specific paperwork, and you guys have talked about there isn't like you need to write all of this down to the T, give this exact letter to physicians, but is there suggested formats for this? Does it need to contain anything specific?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have templates on our website. I'm happy to drop a link to that'll especially for service providers, right, that want to write those letters on behalf of somebody. There is specific language, but really the only thing you have to keep in mind is like, hey, I know this person has a disability, and I know that the animal alleviates the symptom of the disability. And that's really the core language we're looking for. If it's on a letterhead, perfect. Because what we tell tenants too, or anybody looking for housing, The one thing that the landlord is able to do, they can't ask what your disability is, they can't ask any personal questions, but what they can do is call the provider and verify that they know you and verify that that they know that you're a person with disability. So that's what we encourage people to know, especially if they have like a letter that is a few years old. If they're no longer in touch with that provider, that may, that might be an issue if the landlord decides to, or housing provider decides to reach out. But so there are templates and there is a process, right? That process is called the reasonable accommodation process. Step one is making sure that you communicate with your landlord and you make that reasonable accommodation request, right? And it's like legal jargon, and all you're saying is like, hey, I know that maybe the lease says no pets, or maybe the shelter I'm trying to get into says no pets, but I'm asking you to make to accommodate my disability. And you have that legal right under the Fair Housing Act and Disability Rights Act. So yeah, I think that's important. And then what happens afterwards is there's interactive process. Again, more legal jargon, but for us, what that means is the landlord can't outright deny and say, no, like I don't want this. My lease says this. They're gonna have to work with you. So let's say somebody is like, oh, somebody in the building has allergies, or there's another rule that they're working around. And I'm always like, hey, so long as it's not, so it's reasonable, right? It's not, you're not asking for a small pony. And if you are, that's a whole different thing. But you're not asking for like a small barn to be built in the back area, right? You're asking to be able to live with your creature, with your support animal. And maybe that's, hey, my dog might need to have a soft muzzle on because my dog's a little mouthy, right? I think there are always ways we can mitigate risk, and ways that we can work with the housing provider in that interactive process to make sure that both parties are understanding of the situation and that the person's ultimately able to exercise their legal rights.
That is great. And that actually brings me to another question about you mentioned self-certification, which I had never heard of before. I didn't know people could self-certify. And I was curious, does that documentation process look any different? Do people need to say anything? Is it just verifying their need for emotional support animal? I'm really curious to know about that. That was the first time I heard about it.
Yeah, and I think it's one that people don't really use to because it's not really, it's like in the weeds in the law. So all we would recommend they do is attach a copy of their certification letter that they receive those benefits. And that's really it, right? And then it's like, hey, I'm a person with disability, I'm a tenant here, I'm applying for your sure, or whatever it is. Ooh, there's one other thought that I had, and it's escaping right now, but I'm sure it'll come back to me.
Oh, that's super neat. Thank you so much. I think we had another person jump in. Is there any current legislative action in the works to try to establish any national policies with less restrictive language?
There are, and like there are, and in California, and we're working really hard. They get a lot of pushback. And in LA specifically, we have I forget the acronym, but it's an association of landlords, and they're very well organized, and they tend to get together when these pet inclusive policies come up. So I think there is one that is pushing through at least LA City Council, and that I think it's to allow at least one pet in a household and eradicate pet rent and those extra like pet fees. So there are efforts, and I think for us as an organization that really like wants to uplift communities and advocate, it's really about lived experience, right? Bring people into those city council meetings, bring people in to make public comment, because the landlords are well organized, right? On their end, they're going to come in, they're going to show up, they're going to call. And on our end, it's like, okay, like how can we reach out to our clients and like really help push to make this change? Because it's their voices that are the most important.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. And another question, how do you handle clients who have multiple animals? Is this a process where you write multiple letters, or what does that look like?
So it's just one letter. We do recommend that the letter list all the pets that are, or all the support animals that are included or are caring for this individual. It doesn't have to be a specification on the abilities of the animal, or it's not a promise that the animal is going to be well behaved. And that's often a liability issue that we come across is doctors or medical professionals don't want to write these letters because they don't want to have to advocate specifically for a dog or a cat. But it is simply just letting the emotional support animal letter just says that you have X amount of support cats, X amount of support dogs, and that they're providing relief from a disability. I guess the only actual restriction that does exist is based on where you are in the country. So here in Los Angeles, our county has restrictions on how many dogs and how many cats can be in one unit. And so that is the restriction that we do let the clients that we're working with know about. I think it's 5 dogs and 4 cats. And then it changes if you're in the city of Los Angeles, it's 5 dogs and 3 cats. So those are just things that you have to keep in mind when you're working with clients or pet owners, is just making sure you know what the local pet laws are. Those pet laws are separate from what the Fair Housing Act says, but they are still something that you're subject to. So that's something to keep in mind, is that there's no restriction for how many support animals a person can have, but there are those ordinances that on a more local level on how many pets can be inside of a house or a unit.
Okay, that's so helpful to know because that's definitely a case that comes through my inbox every once in a while. Dana, did you have anything else to add? I hope I'm not cutting you off.
No, I don't think so. I know that we're the little timer is blinking in my face, but I wanted to just show my appreciation for my dogs, my home, for everyone here holding space, and welcome y'all to reach out to us if you have any questions to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much. To wrap up our session, I wanted to end on this question. This year's conference theme is Why Pets? Why Now? The Urgency of Inclusion. So I'd love to ask the two of you, why do you think pet inclusive solutions to homelessness are urgent among all other urgent social issues that people are working to solve?
I would just say I've had a really great time listening to everybody else who's speaking about pet inclusivity and the urgency of it for now. What I've been hearing over and over again is aligned with what I also have been thinking, is that the pet issues that people face are not just a monolith or are not just across the animal welfare space. I think they also are just like addressing a lot of crises at once. So homelessness and mental health, and the barrier that exists for equitable housing. And so by making sure that people aren't having to choose between the shelter and their animals, we're preventing any unnecessary suffering. I think that there's a lot of legal framework that already exists that advocates for people, like the fair housing laws that we've been talking about for half an hour. And I think that those allow individuals who are especially vulnerable the chance to stay co-sheltered with their pets. And what we're talking about isn't just an issue specific to what we do. I think it's also a crisis point that exists, and it's one that should be addressed immediately. Failing to consider pet inclusivity, I think, isn't just like something to overlook or an oversight. I think it's just a missed opportunity for us to create more compassionate intervention. And that's the work that Heart LA does, and the work that I know My Dog is My Home is striving for. And yeah, I'm just grateful to be able to be a part of this conversation. And Deanna and I are always open to having more conversations with people individually if they need support from us in any way.
Thank you so much, Zaira. Dana, I'd love to hear your response as well.
Yeah, I mean, housing is at the intersection of so many other problems, right? We have clients that have come to us that are survivors of domestic violence, that are formerly incarcerated, that are experiencing or that are unsheltered, right, out in the street. So it's like, yes, housing is one issue, but if you can't afford rent, can you afford food for yourself? Can you afford like medical support for yourself? Can you, pet supplies, whatever it is, like housing is the intersection of so many other problems. And I think in order to help people in like the best way we can't just treat things as like living in their own bubble, right? It's because it's so interconnected. The best we can do is provide support to people. Like Lori was saying earlier today, right? If it's a car payment, if do you need to get your car to impound? Hey, that doesn't like relate to the work we do, but it does because that person is living in their car with their creature, right? So that's what it is for me. It's always urgent. I think the housing crisis in this country is just it's mounting and mounting. We can't ignore it. And we need to be able to support people at all levels because it's again so interconnected.
Thank you both so much for your expertise and for sharing such valuable information with all of us here today. I am also extremely appreciative to all the participants who sent in questions and joined us in conversation. We are so grateful for your time and excited to be discussing these important topics. Diana, Zaira, thank you so much for your time. And thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you in another session.
Thank you.
Thank you.